You are listening to the Spirited Discussion Podcast, a podcast dedicated to all things Spirit Island. I'm your host, Thomas, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, the designer of the game, Eric Royce. We'll be touching on a lot of topics today. Rather than me spoil anything, I'll let Eric introduce himself.
Yeah, my name is Eric Royce. I'm a game designer, a dad. I used to be a computer programmer. I've designed a few games, but Spirit Island is the most well known of them, and I am really happy to be here to talk about it.
Okay, before we get the show on the road, I think that there was something you wanted to share before we started.
So, just to address the elephant in the room, I'm not going to be talking a lot about sort of the publishing situation with Spirit Island. Um, I am really sad about what happened with Greater Than Games, but I'd much rather talk about the game as a board game right now than the publishing situation, and for a variety of reasons, it's not something that I want to or am able to discuss at length on, in a public forum right now. So this podcast is going to be about the game Spirit Island, and let's go do that.
Well, actually, I wanted to start by discussing what else have you designed.
I designed my first published title was called Fealty, which is a sort of lightly themed abstract positional. It came out with Asmati Games back around 2011, 2012. Then I have another game which is published under the name For Science, which is it's also a cooperative game, but it's not like Spirit Island. It is a real-time dexterity cooperative game with other non-dexterity elements as well. It came out through Gray Fox in 2021 or so, where you're trying to like design molecules to cure diseases, and the molecules are basically blueprints of wooden blocks, and then you need to actually build the structures you've designed. Um,
It sounds toy-like as much as it is a game.
yes, it totally is. One of the things which I really like about it, and which people enjoy about it, is like you just spill out the components, and immediately people start playing with wooden blocks because wooden blocks are fun.
Yeah.
It is not as strategic and thinky as Spirit Island, not by a long shot. And it is much, much shorter. It lasts about 10 to 15 minutes.
Oh, that's way shorter. Would you
Yeah.
recommend either of these games to people who play Spirit Island?
Uh, it depends. Some people like Spirit Island for reasons which are unique to Spirit Island. Other people sort of vibe with my design aesthetic in general. There's some pieces, like nearly every game I've ever designed has a certain amount of spatiality to it. Spirit Island has it with the adjacencies and the targeting and trying to like, pocket areas and all that sort of stuff. Fealty is very spatial. It is a sort of delayed resolution area capture game where some pieces move faster than others, even if they weren't played first. Uh, and For Science is very spatial, both in like creating these blueprints and then building these things out of physical blocks. And then when you complete cures, you earn sort of lab points to try and assemble a universal vaccine. And that itself is also a spatial puzzle. So people who enjoy that aspect of my design might like all three. People who are specifically in Spirit Island for like the really intense brain burny thinkiness, then For Science is not good because it's a real time game. But their fealty might be okay. But again, fealty is competitive rather than cooperative. And it's also a lighter game, well, shorter game at the very least. It's more sort of a appetizer, 30-minute game, 40-minute game.
Do you have a preference towards designing competitive or cooperative games?
I enjoy both. I mean, I like playing both. Cooperative games, I find these days are like easier and easier to find playtesters for. A lot of people I know enjoy playing co-ops a lot. And so getting them to the table is simpler. I also enjoy competitive games. There are some ways in which competitive games are easier, might not be the right term. Balance issues tend to jump out more in competitive games. People will come back with feedback like, I was playing this faction and I just couldn't win. It wouldn't work out. And so, they get called to your attention really quickly. Whereas if you're playtesting Spirit Island or another co-op and one faction is a little strong or a little weak, well, I mean, on the one hand, it's not as big a deal because it's a co-op, but on the other hand, like you do want a certain amount of balance. Like it still is important so everybody feels like they're involved and contributing and having a good time. And players who are playing, say, a spirit, which is a little bit strong, may not mention that. They'll just be like, hey, I won, and that's great. And so it's a little bit harder to get the balance getting feedback on like, oh, the spirit is a bit weak is easier. But then sometimes you'll get people who are like, well, I lost, and I feel bad about having lost, and so they might report, like this spirit is, I'm not sure. So it becomes harder to disentangle strength feedback from game results in a co-op, in some ways, because they don't necessarily line up, especially when you have like lots and lots of difficulty levers. And so exactly what difficulty is being played at is a function of which of those you've chosen to set, as opposed to you're sitting down and your difficulty is who are you playing against for a competitive game.
For sure. Whenever you're looking at the range of balance for a competitive or a cooperative game, the range has to be much more tight for a competitive game. And while the range can be wider for a cooperative game, you don't want it to be so wide that things aren't engaging at every part of it.
Exactly, and that's really the core of it. You can end up with this happens more like in for science, which I just mentioned. There's unique player rules, different types of lab technicians or scientists or whatnot, and it's a lighter, shorter game, although not light, and because of that, there's even more of a sort of a window for imbalance. But what you said about engagement is really important. Like, if a role is less powerful, it needs to be more engaging. It needs to be something where, even though you may not be like quite as effective on the table, what you're doing needs to be awesome. Like there's one of the roles, I can't remember if it's a promo or not, where you're trying to build these block structures with your eyes closed. And you get benefits when you do so. Like you get major benefits, but for many players, those benefits may not be worth it depending on how good or bad you are at building block towers with your eyes closed. But there's a lot of players who are like, does this help me win more? No, but it's amazing, so I play it anyway. And
Yeah.
that's really, it's about the overall experience, and balance is just one piece of that.
Could you imagine making a spirit that was particularly bad but very fun to play? And how would you go about trying to move those while keeping the fun?
Often we'll try to actually kind of do that first. It's nearly always easier to add strength to a spirit while keeping it thematically coherent and fun to play than it is to pull strength out while keeping those things. Uh, a little while back, actually, Ted Vesinus and I designed an Apocrypha spirit, Covet's Gleaming Shards of Earth, which is an apocrypha, a non-official spirit, based. In this case, it's non-official. It can never be canon because it's sort of the concept of like, what if there's a dragon? The idea is it's a spirit which might come out of stories that a Dahan storyteller tells after hearing European legends of dragons, and so it's sort of filtered through multiple eyes, or multiple ears rather, and major kudos to Ted on this. Like, he drove this. We both collaborated on it, but he, I guess I'd say, like, managed the project and got me to actually get to the table and provide my input. Like, it would not exist if not for his effort. So, like, if you enjoy the spirit, totally thank Ted. And But when it first came out, that what you just mentioned was exactly the reaction. People were like, like this spirit, like, it can handle lower difficulty games, but it does, it feels like it's struggling in higher difficulty games. But wow, is it fun to play? People, especially like Spirit Island veterans, really enjoyed the mini game about collecting loot, because the spirit basically encourages you, entices you for thematic reasons to like be like, I could prevent blight, but what I'd really rather do is chase down all this shiny metal that the invaders have, because I want that for my horde. It was designed to sort of elicit feelings of greed and covetousness. And and that really, like, it resonated. People really were like, yeah, I want to do that. and then they lost, but they had a good time doing it, so it worked out okay. And Ted has been iterating on that, so it's getting more powerful. But
I think I recently saw it was on version 3. I haven't
I
played
think so.
kept
Yeah,
up with it, but it's really cool.
yeah, yeah. It's
You had mentioned that it couldn't exist because of like it's almost like a story of a story. What drives designing a spirit or an event or anything within the game?
It really varies on the type of game item. For a spirit, it will sometimes start with a mechanical conceit, but more often start with a thematic one. But either way, it will jump to the other right away. Like if it's a mechanical idea, it's like, oh, okay, this is an interesting mechanism. What kind of spirit would do this? Either on a broad thematic level, or if the mechanism has like strong elemental associations, it's like, okay, if this is this sort of spirit's elemental portfolio, what are all the powers which have those elements? What does that suggest about what the spirit might be like? That sort of thing. And if it's a thematic idea right off the bat, then it's like, okay, let's think about the theming, think about the story. Now, how could that be represented mechanically? And then it just sort of ping pongs back and forth, going between those sort of in longer iterations on each side, going back and forth. Exactly where the inspiration comes from can really vary. Like, Downpour Drenches the World came out of a conversation with Ted. Eyes Watch from the Trees came from me walking past a tree and noticing like one of those sort of rotted out hollows,
Yeah.
and just looking at it and not being able to see the back of it and being like, I don't know what's in there. And that just sort of sparking into, oh yeah, yeah, when you're in the middle of a big jungle and there's lots of those, it can be kind of creepy, and going from there. So really depends spirit by spirit.
I feel as though the game is incredibly thematic. How important was theming to be in the game?
Oh, thank you very much. Really important. It was prior to Spirit Island. Most of my designs leaned fairly heavily in sort of a Euro direction. Not that I would ignore theme entirely, but it was never a. I wanted sort of a congruence between theme and mechanisms, but I didn't really care that deeply about the game being deeply thematic. So I cared that the theme was the right theme, but I didn't. The mechanisms would still be pretty clean, pretty symmetric, maybe asymmetric player powers, but not sort of like heavily theme informed with lots of different stuff. Uh, Spirit Island was a project where I deliberately set out to stretch myself and be like, okay, no, let's make. Basically, what it was I was intimidated by the idea of how much stuff I'd need to come up with for a heavily thematic game, and how just the volume of uh, details for mechanical implementation that all that thematic would sort of end up wanting if I sort of went deep into something thematic. So I pursued it to improve my skills as a game designer, and sat down and was like, okay, all right, let's make a list as long as I can think of over the course of an afternoon of like what are the different ways that a spirit or uh, being or kami or fae or what have you out of any sort of fairy tale legend myth that I happen to be familiar with from reading over the course of like 40, 50 years of life. Like what, given those, how might they try and deal with colonists? And just kind of go through this huge broad, like, okay, here's all the thematic ways they might do it. And then from those try and like shake those and sift them until I found common threads, until it's like, okay, there's a bunch of different ways which seem to want to do X. All right, how am I going to implement that mechanically? Because it seems like it wants to exist thematically. So the game has deep thematic roots and took a lot of upfront work as a result, but I'm really happy with how it turned out, and very pleased that the theme resonates with people so much, both in terms of what I'll call, actually, there's a reviewer who has called out like theme versus setting. And The setting of the game is Spirit Island, this sort of, tropical island. There's spirits, they're Dahan, they're invaders, there's colonialism going on, you're trying to stop them. The themes of the game, there's a variety of them, but the obvious one is anti-colonialism. So both on a sort of setting level and on a theme level, I'm very pleased that both of those have resonated with people so much.
Yeah, yeah, nailing down the language between setting and theme. Uh, I think that both are very precise within the game. I am so happy every single time I set the game up, and I want to be there. I feel like I am there and affecting the world over dozens of years. And I feel as though the actions that I'm taking are impacting the Dahan as well as the invaders, and I am doing things that are thematic towards what a spirit would do. There are a lot of things that you just said, and so many strings that I could go down. The one that pops to my mind is how did you make it so that it feels like the Dahan and the spirits are on the same side?
That was a tricky and important one. Getting the relationship between Dahan communities and spirits was really important because there are a lot of sort of, I guess, pitfalls to fall into where having, if Dahan communities are subservient to spirits, that's not good. If spirits are, sort of purely subservient to Dahan peoples, then that is that's the type of subjugation of the natural world which indigenous peoples tend to not do until and unless they start adopting more Western and colonial ways, or when forced into it sometimes. The So neither of those was okay. They definitely should have a very strong relationship. The ancestors of the various Dahan peoples arrived many, centuries ago, and have had to work out a lot of things over those generations and centuries. So it was really important that they had reached a sort of, not a stasis, like things are still dynamic, but they'd had a chance to work out a lot of their issues and achieve, for the most part, sort of a healthy neighbor relationship, which is what I went for. The spirits are very deliberately not Dahan gods. There are Dahan religious practices in which spirits may be involved. Spirits are part of the natural world. Some may be, messengers to the gods. They were created by the gods. They're special, but it's not. Dahan communities aren't worshiping the spirits, even if the spirits are involved in their worship. They do give thanks to the spirits, to some of them. Others, they're like, thank you for staying far away from us. Uh, but they have a variety of appropriate relationships with the spirits around them, and what those appropriate relationships are varies with the spirits. So for getting that in the game, while not devoting a lot of mechanical attention to it, because the original, the game as originally focused is focused on spirits rather than Dahan, took a lot of iteration. The major sticking point early on was like whether invaders ravaging would deal damage to the land first or to Dahan first, because I went back and forth between them, and both had bad dynamics of a variety of ways. Neither really worked well, and I was at first a little reluctant to have, like, okay, they do damage to both simultaneously, because it seemed like just a little more complex rules wise, a little bit harder to wrap brains around. But in terms of what it did for portraying the truth of the world, that invaders were aggressing simultaneously against the land and therefore spirits and Dahan, was, because it was true, it ended up working out much better. It reflected the setting reality and the thematic reality, and so having that as the mechanistic reality just felt better, and works better in a variety of ways. So that was the big one. There were also some other decisions, like none of the spirits have an active incentive to harm Dahan. Uh,
No,
you
none of
know,
them are pretty ambivalent to harming the Dahan, but no one actively wants to hurt them.
Exactly, and that's a conscious choice. It's not that such spirits don't exist in the setting. There are spirits, for example, which feed on the soul forms of the dead. And, they don't care who's died, so they would be entirely happy for humans to die, whoever those humans are, so that they have more chances for tasty snacks. Uh, but that's not something that I want players to be enacting in terms of a spirit relating with the Han peoples. It's So that's just sort of exists in setting is not shown as a playable position for that reason. Um,
I will point out in various different games whenever something comes up and I feel as though it's pushing me to do perverse things. Um, Example, recently I was playing Arkham Horror and I'm trying to have a low amount of sanity, and so I thought dying, intentionally losing, would be a better outcome than something else so that I could have lower sanity in the future. That feels very perverse, and I haven't really found any time where Spirit Island has pushed me into these situations where I'm like, man, I hope the Dahan die right now.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. You can get some weird situations, but usually the incentives in game and out of game align. Like there was one game where I was playing Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares and ended up deliberately cascading blight back and forth between two lands in order to dump more blight on the board because I had the Land Thrash's and Furious Pain in my hand and it let me win. So on the one
That's a
hand,
little
that's a
weird.
really weird thing for a spirit to do. On the other hand, in the fiction of the setting, it is something that a spirit might allow to happen because of it's like, well, I'll let the land get really damaged because I have the power to turn that into to fuel the nightmares of these settlers, and that will drive them away. So it's a weird situation, but it's not a counter setting situation.
I agree. Absolutely. In that situation, you were probably playing with yourself or with a group of people. Uh, do you think that people will just like come up with the best solution as a group, or how much agency do you want to give to the players as individuals? Because if we weren't winning that turn and I saw you blight cascading into the land, like, hey, Eric, what are you doing?
Yeah, yeah, that was a solo game. It was actually a game where somebody sort of wanted to play through to get a handle on how Bringer could handle things. If I recall correctly, they sort of saw Bringer's right innate, which grants like 1 to 4 fear, and were like, "Oh, there's my big fear generation." And they're like, "How do you do more than that?" I'm like, "Okay, all right. So let me write down a game." I also wanted to sort of introduce the idea of the sort of chess style notation for like, okay, this happens in this land, kind of show that you could exactly and formally specify everything which is going on. This was like in the very early days, like in the first, I
Yeah.
think, 4 months after the game was published. Um, but if I were doing that with other people, I would absolutely check in with them before doing that. Like that's the kind of thing. Like, would I have to? No. But if I didn't, would they give me the major side eye? Yeah, probably. The Now, depending on like the situation, like if we were on Healthy Island and it was in mid game or something, I might be like, I might present it differently instead of being like, hey, everybody, would it be okay if I did this? I might be like, hey, anybody mind if I use up some of this blight? Especially if I'm playing Vengeance or
Yeah.
something, where the reasoning is a little more obvious. I might be more flippant about it, but no, in general, I try it blight is a shared resource pool, so it impacts everybody, and it's a loss condition, so it impacts everybody. Um,
Mhm.
but in
There
general, I'm
are
pretty happy with. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to mention that there are several spirits that really interact with other players, like Ocean or Finder.
Yep.
Were those notably more difficult to implement within the game? Did it require more playtesting, people to say, okay, I'm comfortable doing what they want to do, or engaging with what their powers are letting me do? I find that the spirits are already well integrated, but some spirits way more than others.
So for Ocean, not so much. There, it's pretty obvious to people like. Ocean can handle coasts, but has trouble with inland. And I think it even calls it out on the back of the spirit panel. So, and you're sort of in the online Discord community play, there's a pretty strong emphasis on handle your own board first and then go help other people. That's a style of play which is very well suited to the types of games which many people play, which are designed to be like played extremely rapidly, and so minimizing the necessity for cross-board collaboration and lowering the likelihood of own-board mistakes is sort of a highly valuable thing, and so limiting people's search space in that way it makes sense. But for a lot of people, including many playtesters, that's not the way they tend to want to approach the game. They have a much more like, let's get all in each other's business right off the bat and try and help each other out way. And so for Ocean, that just kind of changes the parameters of how people do that. It's like, oh, well, you're obviously on the coasts. So I'm obviously going to go deal with the places which are inland. Like, it took some attention to make sure that you could play Ocean solo. But honestly, even if it had come out like, well, you can play Ocean solo, but it's basically doomed. Like, I would be okay publishing a spirit like that. I would like to make all spirits available solo. That would be, and have them be just as viable. That's nice. But I would, if I come up with a spirit and it's like, well, this doesn't work well in large games. This doesn't work well in solo games. This doesn't work well if this single other spirit is in the game. Like, I'm not going to take a really good concept and chuck it out the window just because it won't work for every single type of game. Um, Similarly, like, some spirits will have bad matchups against certain adversaries. Like, that's not a ding. That's actually, in some ways, that's a benefit. Like,
It's a
if
feature.
if spirits don't have bad matchups, that means the spirits are too similar. Uh, Spirits should have bad matchups because spirits should have different weaknesses and strengths.
Ocean dealing with the coast. Um, it almost feels like depending on who's in the game, the board isn't split up as 8 lands per board, but like these 8 lands are your lands. And so in a 3-player
Yeah,
Ocean
it can
game,
be.
these 9 lands
Yep.
are yours, and volcanoes in play, so that mountain and around it are theirs, and so everyone else has
Yes.
to deal with the rest.
One of the challenges of the game is attentional focus, where like if a bad ravage is coming up, who notices it and how far in advance do they notice it? The something which new players, I think this got mentioned when you were interviewing your friend who's new to the game, where like the first time you play with a 3 or 4 board game, there's just this overwhelming sea of stuff. It's
It's
one of the reasons I
everything.
don't like teaching at 4 players. It's not that what a player is doing is any more complex in terms of the mechanisms of the game, but the visual parsing complexity goes through the roof. So learning with 2 or even 3 can be like much easier. Uh, so that's sort of the benefit of the attentional focus is that it means rather than everybody attempting to look at the whole island and maybe everybody doesn't happen to notice that bad blight cascade threat off in a corner somewhere. Instead, if there's sort of like, these delineated areas of responsibility, then somebody can, raise their hand and be like, um, but groups vary a lot in terms of how big those areas are, whether or not it's an area of not just attentional responsibility, but I'm also going to handle it, or if it's just on somebody to like raise the flag and say, so people know there's a really bad problem in this land. So somebody should handle it. You know, that's the more shorthands you use, the faster and more efficiently you can play, but you also lose opportunities for cross-board collaboration.
Yeah, I really like the cross-board collaboration. Something I really like is working together to make the best decisions. Figure out what the best thing is. Like I might have my game plan. This is what I want to do on turn 1, 2, or 3, and someone says, "Well, I could give you 2 energy," and I go, "Let me rewrite everything. I can figure it out." And then the event comes, and let me rewrite everything. But I want to do that like with every single action. How do I figure out what the best thing to do for the table is? And working together to come to that conclusion is super fun. And so I'm analyzing the board as a whole, but it's so much easier and smoother whenever I say, okay, that's your thing and this is my thing, and oh, you need help? Okay, I can come over. It's less fun for me.
Yeah, I tend to like it when we're sort of each handling a lot of things that we can, but then somebody raises a red flag about, There's a problem over here, and I just can't cope with it. Like, it's not this turn, it's next turn. Like, what can people bring to bear? And usually it results in this interesting cascade of cooperation to fix everything. Sometimes it results in, yep, that sure is a problem. We're sure not going to deal with it.
Dang, that sure does suck.
Yep,
Anyways,
yep.
is there any particular aspect of the game that you're particularly proud of?
I mean, all of them? I don't know.
That's
I,
completely
I'm
reasonable.
not.
The game is pretty
It's
great.
uh, it's. Thank you. I guess there is something which stands out, which is that I've heard from some people occasionally that it has been either in some cases that it's been very satisfying on an emotional level because of the anti-colonial theme, or in some cases that it's allowed people to bring up the problems of colonialism with their kids after playing. And that latter
Wow.
is something which I like. It wasn't a deliberate design goal. I did not, I knew that there would be some people who loved Spirit Island. I could tell that from playtesting, but I did not expect it to have nearly the reach which it does. And I'm immensely grateful for that. But because of that, this wasn't really a scenario that was on my mind when I was designing it. And so whenever I hear that it has facilitated a conversation about real world problems, and in some cases helped illustrate that, I feel even more grateful and kind of humbled and really, really happy.
That's awesome. Do you think the game would have done as well 300 years ago?
Oh, geez. I mean, no, well, okay. Even completely aside from the like, this game is completely harshing on these things which people are doing, and they
Yeah.
probably wouldn't take that very nicely. Uh, the no, I feel like I started designing Spirit Island back around initial ideas were like 2010 or so, but I then did the first sort of major push on it in 2012, and it didn't go to crowdfunding until 2015, and then wasn't actually delivered until 2017. And I think if it had come out even 5 years earlier, like if I had, managed somehow to get it signed and published in 2012, I think it would not have done as well. I also think it wouldn't have been as good. I think it benefited a lot from that kind of like, crock pot slow cooker, like, because, my wife and I had our first kid in 2012. And so my pace of development slowed way down, which kind of forced me to like step away from Spirit Island over and over and over and then come back to it. And I can point at things and be like, oh yeah, like this, that, the other thing. Like there are all these things where that time and space to breathe and space to simmer definitely helped the game. But even if the game as published were teleported back 5 years in time to 2012, I think it would not have found as wide an audience because I think that the number of people interested in board games was like growing. I can't remember what it, but like, I don't know in terms of number of actual people, but I know that economically there was a span of years in the 20 teens where it was growing like 20% year on year, which for
Yeah, from
yearly growth
20
is
two
really
thousand
big.
nine to like 2019 or so, it was a huge amount every year.
Yeah, yeah. So, just the expansion of the hobby market in general definitely did good things. And on top of that, like the percent, there's probably, I don't know if it's a constant percentage, but there's, some subset of people who play these sorts of games who enjoy sort of crunchier, more thinky, heavier weight, longer games. And, that's a smaller proportion of the whole. There's a fairly large market for the sort of more family weight, lighter weight games. And so there were more of those people. And uh the those years also, like, all the years, I can't remember exactly what year pandemic came out, but I think it was 2008 maybe, I'm not sure, but it was over those early teens and such, like co-ops became more of a thing. There were many more co-op games coming out, and but very few of them were longer than maybe 75 or 90 minutes. The vast majority of them were fairly fast affairs, like uh, Mage Knight, I think, was the big major exception. Um, so, or if it wasn't, sorry, the other big exception was like Arkham Horror, but Arkham Horror wasn't a 2 or 3 hour game. Arkham Horror was an all day game. So the, uh, so sort of like just the, what gamers were out there, what they were looking for, what they were comfortable with, kind of changed in a way which made Spirit Island, I think, land better in 2017 than it would have in 2012.
That's really thoughtful. Um, it almost sounds like you had landed on like the perfect time, not too early that it would have failed through almost its own hubris, but not too late for it to have missed ever landing.
Yeah, I am tremendously grateful for how well it's done. I would not have minded it coming out in 2016 or 2018, uh, purely just because Gloomhaven also came out in 2017, which meant that for basically every award in terms of co-op games, it was going up against the Gloomhaven juggernaut because Spirit Island has done extremely well, but in the early days, it was not like it did fine on the crowdfunding. It did reasonably well. It got like double its funding goal, but it was not one of the like smash out of the ballpark hits. It grew as people sort of like came for the theme, stayed for the gameplay and the theme.
Yeah.
Uh, Sort of, so it sort of like snowballed over the course of many years. It wasn't clear until after it actually released into the wild in late 2017, like, oh yeah, okay, this has legs, as opposed to Gloomhaven, which had, I can't remember what its first Kickstarter was, but it was very large. And so it was kind of like, okay, yes, like, whether Gloomhaven follows through on it or not is the open question, but it already has the smash part of smash hit. Uh, so
When did you know that you had a hit?
uh
Was it before or after 2017?
it was probably about half a year after it came out, I think. Like when it was clear that it wasn't, because there's a pretty common pattern where a game will, fulfill, and then there'll be a little burst of excitement about it, and then it will fade away. And I had seen that on my first published game, Fealty. That one was not aided by the fact that there were uh, distributor issues, which meant that like during that initial burst of excitement, you literally couldn't get the game. Uh, but even so, like over and over again, you see a game comes out, it gets a little bit of attention, and then it fades away. And maybe it gets a reprint some year, maybe it doesn't. So when and I think the first major review for Spirit Island, which came out, was kind of, it wasn't down on it, but it was like, this is kind of on the complex side, and it's not really, what one of the people involved was really expecting. So it was sort of like, mixed, tepid. Um, so it wasn't immediately obvious that it was going to be a hit, but as the months went on and more people were talking about it and the reviews were getting more and more positive and people were getting more and more excited, it started to become clear, yeah, no, okay, this, instead of being that sort of like burst and then down, the public conversation about it was growing over time and continuing to grow. So it's like, oh yeah, this looks good. This looks great. So
It's 8 years later and still going strong.
yeah, which is fantastic. I'm super happy.
The community does a lot of weird stuff. A few months ago, the Discord had a 144 player game. There's weird scenarios happening all the time in the play-by posts. Gen Con does the giant game too. Does it ever shock you what the community does with the game?
The first, I think the first mega game I heard of where like it was like one of every spirit and one of every aspect. So not the recent 144 one. Uh, was a bit of a jaw dropper, but then again, I'd also one um, there's one person who goes by both Frenzy and Utabe online, who had previously done some pretty ridiculous online shenanigans with games, which were solo games. So I was kind of half already saw that. Shock? No. Pleasantly surprise and startle? Absolutely. Like when I see people doing these things, I am delighted that people are able to enjoy the game at scales which I had not even conceived of. It's great. I only actually became aware of some of the sort of weird scenario driven stuff in the play by posts in the last month. I don't generally have time to like specifically be like, oh, let me drop in and watch this play by post game. There's something that I'm aware exists, but I just haven't had the cycles to do that. But something led me to one of them, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting setup. Okay, all right. So that was pretty neat. No, I love that people are doing that. People being creative with the game that I've made is a source of joy for me. And people enjoying it in just about any way is also as long as you're not using the game to support colonialism, it generally makes me happy. Like,
We'll fight colonialism, or we'll do colonialism with what is something that is fighting colonialism.
yeah,
It's,
exactly. Like,
doesn't work.
no, no, like, but people will try and mod their games in all sorts of ways, which broadly speaking, I'm in favor of. Like, I have always felt the itch to change and tweak and house rule games, which I enjoy. Uh, Mess around with them. It's how when I was younger, when I first started developing game design skills by like, hey, let's try changing this rule and seeing what happens. Hey, I think that my friends and I would enjoy this game more if we played it this way instead of that way. Was I right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And that's how I learned.
Hit or miss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just do it again
Yeah.
and again and again. One of the
Absolutely.
games that I had played was a quantum game where all of our presence was entangled, and we were playing on a single board. Everyone was playing a solo game, and whenever time passes, we would take our board and pass it to the left.
Ha! Oh, that's great.
There was a point where the board I was given was completely fine, and I was like, think I was playing Many Minds. I'm gonna G2 and place two presents. I have no cards in hand. I'm not doing anything.
Uh-huh.
And it's just, here you go. Where do you want your presents placed? Because it's coming to you next turn.
Yep.
That was the game. It was really goofy. It created weird situations.
That's excellent.
Um, so for a lot of people, Spirit Island is like a lifestyle game. It's something that they play several times a week or even a day, and it's not your normal game night game. Was this something that you anticipated would happen?
I knew that it would, it run depending on what your player count is and experience and how much players like talking things through. It can be the type of game which will eat up the entirety of 2.5 to 3 hour game night. Or if you have like a 4 hour game afternoon, it can be Spirit Island and then something lighter. So I kind of, was aware of that going in. There's certainly some, I know some couples who will bang out games in 45 minutes, but that is not the norm. Uh, as far as it becoming lifestyle game, again, like I'm not surprised that it is for some people. When I was playtesting, some people when they played the prototype got really, really enthusiastic because like assembling a prototype kit for Spirit Island, and this was in the days before Tabletop Simulator, there was no digital option, involved uh, printing out a whole bunch of stuff, a lot of quality time with a paper cutter, and paying for various bits and bobs, either just using random stuff you happen to have. And if you wanted to actually order all of the stuff on, like by the time you were all done, if you wanted to sleeve everything so you could shuffle it and have stuff which was reasonably representative, you ended up paying more to make the prototype than the actual end base game costs MSRP. Because you're usually not getting economies of scale. And there were people who were really enthusiastic about doing that. And then there were other people who played those prototype copies when I wasn't there. And then they wanted to do it. And so I'm like, oh, okay, this has legs. Like some people are going to just be incredibly into this game. And that's great because honestly, like it's much better on a variety of levels to make a game which a small but noticeable percentage of people love and other people are kind of meh about than it is to make a game which everybody thinks is kind of fine. Um, there's lots of games out there which are kind of fine. We're spoiled for choice on kind of fine games. So, if I or any other designer can make a game which really speaks to that, like, whatever small percentage of people, then that's fantastic. Uh, but again, the percentage of people for whom it's a lifestyle game is a percentage of a much larger number than I'd ever anticipated. So that's fantastic. I read a post on the Discord recently, sort of solving a latent mystery about the digital version stats for like lots of games played with Ocean, and saw that it's apparently like, just sort of like Ocean versus, I think it's Brandenburg Prussia high level, is sort of like a comfort play for somebody who is both a parent and a doctor. And so, like, she comes back after work and just does it to unwind or something. And I found that really touching. I loved that. That was fantastic. And I'm really glad that it can act as a stress reliever for somebody who's doing two tremendously important things with their life.
Yeah.
So, that's great. I love it.
Spirit Island has touched so many people in such a wonderful way. I love that. It's also a bit of a comfort game for our group. While we'll play other games on our normal game night, it gets to the end of the night and we'll be like, want to play a Spirit Island game? It's, like 11 o'clock. We got 90 minutes, right?
Yep.
It's not something we start the game night with. It's something we end it with.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which works great if you know the game. I know some people who've tried to learn the game as the last game of a game night and not had good experience.
Nope. We only do that because we are so comfortable with the game that it's like, we're done thinking. Let's play this.
Yep.
Do you still love the game?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I have actually during the lockdown, I started doing online games with some friends regularly. And I'd played it with friends before that, but not regularly. And then that play group kind of survived the lockdown. We started doing it in person. And like sometimes it'll be playtesting new stuff, but sometimes it'll just be like, no, let's just play a game. Sometimes we'll play in some other co-op, but Spirit Island is sort of the default. And let's go play some stuff. It'll be fun.
Cool. Has there been any other game or designer that's like really influenced your work? Or is Spirit Island just from the heart and soul?
Oh, I mean, I have to give Spirit Island, undoubtedly, it has strong DNA from Magic the Gathering and indirect influence from Robo Rally, both of which are Richard Garfield. The initial, very early versions of Spirit Island were much more action programming than it is now, where instead of fast and slow, like every card had basically a speed on it from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. And you were playing cards face down. And when you reached that number, you would turn up any cards which were relevant. And the invaders went on like 3 and 6 and 9. Or just one, depending on what stage of the game you were in. And so it started off with some sort of Robo Rally roots. Those ended up going away because the game was better without them. But the whole concept of like highly variable card powers is not like Magic didn't invent it. Cosmic Encounter predates it. And I had played Cosmic as well. But Magic the Gathering was a game of my heart during college years. Like it was what I had always wanted trading cards to be. My uncle was very into baseball cards. And my dad a little. So like, growing up, I was like, oh, baseball cards, what are these? And I always wanted to like play games with them. Like, oh, they have stats on the back. They have numbers. So how do you use this to play? And then like Magic the Gathering arrived and was, here's a trading card game which you actually is designed to be played with in that way, as opposed to just maybe facilitating a fantasy sports league or something. And so that was great, and I loved the heck out of it, and played a lot of it up through Fallen Empires, and then fell off. But it definitely informed my concept of what was possible in terms of having an ecosystem of unique cards with wildly varying effects inside of a structured framework. It also has been, I'm not sure if guidepost is the right word. I find it enheartening that it took like Magic until their 6th printing to get the rules minutia like really like or whatever, the rule structure really pinned down. And I'm like, okay, all right, great. So me having, first edition rules substructure issues is not that bad. I being fixing things in a hypothetical second edition. Okay, yeah, second edition instead of sixth. Yeah, that's not too shabby.
I'm a big Magic fan. I'm a recovering Magic player. You know,
Mm-hmm.
don't want to touch the game anymore for reasons, but I really love drafting. And every single time that I look at a power card in this game, they're all unique cards, and I get that same feeling as I do drafting a Magic game. And I love being able to say what's the best thing right now and going with it. And the way that the minor powers to the major power deck flows, where I go, this wasn't a very good draft, but I can at least use it to get a major power, feels empowering. I really like the system that you have with the minor and major power deck.
Thank you. Yeah, that took a lot of adjusting over the years. In the very early days, major power thresholds were basically mandatory. Like you couldn't play them unless you had certain elements at all. But that ended up resulting in a lot of not so great moments. So that ended up changing and turned into the threshold system.
I think the threshold system is awesome. I wish it were on more minor powers even. It's on a bunch of them, but every single time I try to threshold something, it's just exciting. Like I want to play these two cards, but that doesn't threshold this. So how do I do that? The puzzle
Yep.
is super fun for me.
Yeah, yeah. It's supposed to create like, tension between wanting to do things the efficient way in one way and the efficient way in another way, and which of these works together and how does that play into reclaim cycles and board tempo and all of that stuff.
That's reasonable. We've talked about the theme and the setting earlier in our discussion,
Hmm.
but this could have just as easily been about defending a ship in space from aliens. That would be very different, obviously, but like mechanically, that would have all functioned. Have you ever wanted to go down a different route other than this is an anti-colonialist game?
No, and I'll actually push back a little. There's certainly parts of the systems which would work fine in that sort of a setting. Many of them would work well, but there's some which might or might not, depending on the setting. Like whether fear would make sense would be up in the air, and the way in which it happened might want to be different. Uh, if you're talking about like human defenders of a spaceship, then the presence system would be really strange and not work. It might work better if you were talking about AIs or something. So like I think some of the pieces would work, but there's other pieces which wouldn't. I think it would feel a little bit janky. Like not that you couldn't then work on it and try and make it less so, but it would uh, require a fair amount of doing. And there was actually a situation at one point where there was a designer. I can't go into details, but there was a designer who basically said, "I'm going to be working on a design, and it seems like some of the mechanisms in Spirit Island would fit really well. Do you mind if I use them?" Which was very nice of him to touch base. Um, and uh, but then as they started working on it, they came back and they said, I've discovered that everything is really tightly integrated, more so than it seems at first glance. Everything kind of leans on each other. And so grabbing one piece of it without grabbing the others is actually kind of hard. Which I think if you go down like to a much more atomic level, that's not true. Like, plenty of games have like tracks of things, and when you take discs off, you get better stuff. Like that's a very sort of low level mechanism, which many games use. But as you start combining them in different ways, like they are combined specifically to evoke what Spirit Island is, and crafting replacements might be tricky. It's not something I've tried. It's not something I'm super interested in, at least not right now.
Yeah, the more that I think about it, everything is intertwined to such an extent that shifting one might make something else fall apart on itself. Um, it's pretty tight in a lot of ways, and I'm sure that you know that even more than I do. Um, Not just the mechanisms that are within the game, but the narrative, was it like really important that it felt right, or could it have just been this is a strong setting and theme? How important was the story to come out?
The narrative definitely definitely was important. It was something that Ted and I talked about. I can't remember exactly when, but sort of saying like, what is the story here? What is the core type of story which is being told? Is it, a hero's journey, which is kind of stereotypical, or is it, it's a love story, which it isn't, or what sort of thing is it? And because that was important, it was a question that Ted asked me because it was important to pinning down how certain mechanisms worked because it was important that they support that story. And there's a few different types of stories being told at once. One is a story of resistance, perhaps successful, perhaps unsuccessful. But another is a story of growth, sort of combination of some part of it is sort of like the like increasing agency and power of gaining new powers and abilities and getting more powerful as the game goes on, but that's hand in hand with sort of a subtler question, which is how will you change or respond to adversity. So when you're choosing power cards, what will you choose? If you're forgetting for a major, what will you forget? you know how do you reshape yourself as a spirit and your behavior as a spirit in order to answer the threat which is being imposed on you from without. So the and then there's also like emotional beats, like the early game is supposed to feel like there's a certain amount of urgency because that's important for both the setting and the theme. Like if you're just like, haha, we have uh, 5 turns before we actually have to do anything meaningful, then that doesn't necessarily play as well. Not that I'm saying that you couldn't theoretically have a scenario which is like, all right, you have 5 turns and then everything falls on you like a load of bricks. That might actually be interesting, but it's not the core game experience.
The game does a very good job at making it feel like you're losing as early as turn
Yes,
two.
it it still fools me sometimes. I'll be like, oh, we are completely doomed, and sometimes we are, but sometimes we pull it out. So it's
Mm-hmm. More often than not, that feeling subsides very quickly as you look through the mist. And you're like, oh, okay, we're fine. It just looks really bad.
yes, yes.
Would you ever like to see a book written on the island?
Maybe I'd probably want to be the one to write it. Like
Oh
if
yeah.
you know, I have a lot of things about the setting that are in my head that may not have made it anywhere into the published lore or even into my own typed up notes. Like there's just a lot of details, some of which I've just imagined or daydreamed, some of which came to me as I was like, reading about colonialism and doing research on real world indigenous cultures and that kind of thing. Where it's like, oh yeah, like if this is how it works in cases X and Y and Z, there's sort of a similarity. So probably in various Dahan cultures, it might work like Q. The and so like if somebody who isn't me is writing a book, they're going to be constantly colliding with those things, and I'm going to be constantly having to collaborate with them. So like it would probably be easier if I just wrote it, and if my writing is not good enough, then hire somebody to help me with that writing and polishing rather than like, okay, your writing is great, but your facts are half wrong. So let's not do that.
Writing is hard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Uh, a visual novel of the story. I would love to read about this. On the
I feel
back of a
way
lot of
more
spirit
confident. Oh,
panels,
sorry. Go ahead.
on the back of a lot of spirit panels, there's descriptions of different spirits that have existed or what these spirits have done through the history of the island. And they're
Yep.
all short little paragraphs. I'm like, I want to know more. I want
Yeah.
to read about this.
And in some cases, there's a lot more. In some cases, there's not a lot more. There's a skill which you use when you're GMing a role playing game where you want to know enough about the world in the background that you can sort of present a consistent reality. And you need to know in great detail wherever the player characters are looking, and usually a few steps beyond, again, sort of for consistency. But you don't necessarily know what happens if they go off stage left and then journey a certain amount of distance off of the defined area. So in some cases, there's things alluded to where I know just a few more details, like there's a vague sort of sense in my head about what it might be like. In other cases, I know a lot more, and there's like a lot more pinned down. But uh, the I guess the map of the background reality is populated in varying degrees of density in my mind. There's things about the history I know a lot of, and there's things about the history where I'm like, eh,
Yeah,
I know the outcome, but I don't really know how it started or how it got to the end.
for sure. I think that there's so many paths that you could go down starting that journey where just the perspective of where you're reading this from. Is it from a single Dahan and their life, or am I reading this from an elder, or from the perspective of a spirit, or am I shifting perspective all the time?
Yep.
I think that's a really difficult thing to do. Writing is
And
hard.
if a spirit, like how big a spirit, the small spirits of Spirit Island are, much more transient than humans.
Yeah,
But the larger ones are existing and working on and thinking on much vaster timetables. So they would have very different perspectives on issues.
I don't know if anyone else has told you. I'm sure they have, but I would love to read a book.
Ha! All right. Well, it's now you are another person who has told me. So perhaps someday, but right now I'm pretty flat out busy.
For sure. So speaking of books, are there
Yeah.
any that you've been reading lately?
Yeah, I've recently been reading a number of books by Victoria Goddard. Uh, the first one I think the series is called The Lays of the Hearthfire. Lays of the Hearthfire is the name of the series. The first book is The Hands of the Emperor. So I've been reading a bunch of that and enjoying that. Uh, People have been recommending Gideon the Ninth to me for ages. I finally got around to reading that. Uh, what else? I haven't read, but I'm a big fan of Max Gladstone's Craft Sequence, and oh yeah, also like around this time last year, I finally got around to actually starting to read some Terry Pratchett. Like I just you know everybody I know always recommended it, but I tried some of his early Discworld stuff and kind of bounced off of it,
Yeah.
and went back to my friends. They're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, right. His early writing's kind of rough. It gets better later." I'm like, "Okay," and then just sort of never managed it. But then I was after some medical stuff last September, I was recuperating. I'm like, "Okay, I'm just gonna lie here on the couch with my painkillers and a big stack of Terry Pratchett books and start, uh, blasting through those."
Just keep going. It gets good around the third season.
Yeah, 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 basically. Uh, so
Cool. Well, thanks for some of those. I've written some of them down and I'll try to check them out.
I think I also reread the Naomi Novik Scolomancy series, which is dark but a lot of fun.
I like dark.
Yeah, I actually started logging my read books recently, so I can actually give you like an answer, like a comprehensive answer. But I think I've gone over at least most of the highlights.
Cool. Any other games that you like to play?
For board games, yeah,
Yeah, or video games even.
I don't play as many video games as I do board games, but I did really recently enjoy I Was a Teenage Exocolonist. It's a story game. It's very pretty, well written, and your choices genuinely matter. So I had a lot of fun with that. Played through a couple of times. I'm looking forward to Hades 2 coming out of early access soon. I enjoyed Hades 1 a lot, although Pyre was still my favorite Supergiant game. I know it's not as popular, but I have a soft spot in my heart for it. For board games, one which just arrived and I haven't had a chance to get to the table yet is Knitting Circle by Emily Vincent. But I did play it in a playtest a while back, and I'm really excited to see what the final version looks like. I'll always give a shout out to Argent the Consortium by Trey Chambers. It's kind of a worker placement with fireballs, engine building, where you win if the engine of spells and supporters and artifacts and stuff that you've built up is sort of the most appealing to the voters who are electing the new chancellor of a magical university. For the Crown by Jeremy Leonard is sort of a mashup of chess and Dominion, which works way better than you would expect from that description. Like I'm impressed. I would not have thought of that. It's really neat. I have been enjoying Daybreak by Matt Leacock and Matteo Menapace. It's a co-op about fighting climate change, which does an astonishingly good job of boiling down a ridiculously complex problem into a non-ridiculously complex game. And at the same time, having a game which is enjoyable. And at the same time, striking an appropriate emotional tenor of this is a serious problem that needs addressing, but there is hope. Like it manages all
It
three of
is
those
such a
things.
hopeful game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like it does all those. It's like wow, yeah, okay, that's just fantastic. Like I am very glad that it has gotten some good recognition. I think it deserves it. Um, Other games recently on the table. One is Winter Rabbit by Will Thompson, which is a semi-co-op grounded in Cherokee mythology. Will is part of the Cherokee Nation, and it's beautiful and it's really neat. I've only had a chance to play it once so far, so I can't speak in depth as to the gameplay dynamics. I don't know, like there are when I play semi-co-op games, I take my cue. There's always the question, like some people, like if you have a semi-co-op game where everyone can lose, but if everybody doesn't lose, there's a single winner. Then there's the question of, oh, if one person is obviously going to win and it's not you, do you tank the game? Some people can't conceive of doing anything but. They see if everybody loses, that's a tie, and a tie is better than a loss. I tend to not see that, but I tend to take my cues from the thematic framing, especially. And, in something where the game's thematic framing is like, I don't know, a game show, I could go, yeah, I can see that. Sure. But in this case, the thematic framing is you're all part of a village trying to prepare for the winter so you don't starve.
Yeah.
And so, to my mind, that thematic framing clearly indicates, like, no, I would much rather come in last and have the community succeed than come in tie for we all die. Like, that's pretty clear to me. Um, Different semi co op games work or don't work to a different degree depending on how much you buy into that. I don't know where Winter Rabbit falls on that spectrum because I haven't played it with a group and probably won't. Most of my friends have a similar sort of attitude towards semi co ops that I do. So I don't know that I'll run into it. So I guess I raised the point mostly because I don't know if the game requires a play group who buys into the narrative conceit on the semi co op angle, or whether it works just fine if people go, you're going to run away with a victory? Fine, we're all going hungry. Like, I don't know about that. But I love the art. Uh, I love the stories. The story cards are very short. They allude to myths which have got to be like much more elaborate in their longer form. But I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed a lot of the thoughtful thematic touches in it. It's really neat. Um, the
Semi-cooperative games do require that hefty buy-in, I think. You
Yes,
could
absolutely.
play the way that you're describing, where someone tanks it if they know they can't win, but the design is trying to make you not, and as you
Yes.
say, you have to buy in. You have to just say, "Oh well, I'm here for the ride, not for the finish."
And I feel like the rulebook in Winter Rabbit does a good job framing it. It has like a 2 or 3 sentence, paragraph about it, which says like, I can't remember it exactly. I won't do the words justice, but it's roughly like, you're all living together. You are totally doing engaging in sort of like one-upsmanship and rivalry. But these are the same people you're going to be living next to for perhaps the rest of your life. Um, this season's winner is next season's loser, and you know, you got to live with each other. So you want to make sure that you're jockeying for position, but still doing right by each other. And I feel like that's a really good framing.
One rule book I had read kind of framed it out saying everyone should be trying to win, and if you're not, like, sure, everyone will lose, but be aware that you're the biggest loser.
Oh, okay. Yep. Yeah, I appreciate it when rulebooks give that kind of framing for a semi-co-op and kind of give a cue for how the game is intended to be approached. Because a playgroup is always free to ignore that and approach it however
Yeah,
they like. But then if they get something out of it which is not the intended play experience, well, that's how it goes.
yeah. Uh,
You know,
Consumers will do what they will do, and that's everything under the sun.
yeah, like could you play Spirit Island as a screw your neighbors, like my board is cleaner than your board, ha 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 game? Yes, you totally can. You're probably not likely to get the same kind of experience that most people go to the game for.
100%.
Uh, so I also just started Regicide Legacy. I enjoy Regicide. It's a co-op which you can play with a standard deck of playing cards, though you can also buy a bespoke one. And Regicide Legacy is a legacy version. I'm on like mission 3 or so. I'm playing it with my kids and having a good time with that.
That's awesome. Finding games to play with kids is challenging in my mind. I don't have kids though,
Yeah.
so maybe it's easier for you.
Ha. Uh, it's in some ways it's easier. Like I can't. I've tried very hard from the early years to not force my kids to play games with me, not be like, this is what we're doing. I wanted them, if they enjoyed games, to come by that love naturally. So, one of my kids is more into board games, the other is less into board games, but they're both intrigued enough by Regicide that they're willing to play through for that. And having a really good time. And like after most of the sessions, it's been like, can we play again right now? No, it's too close to bedtime.
Very fun.
Yeah.
Kids have that infinite energy, right? Just do it
Oh,
again, do it
yeah,
again.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, do it again, do it again. Also that consequences? What consequences? I can stay up forever and I will be fine tomorrow. Narrator, they were not fine tomorrow.
We've all been kids. We know how it goes.
Yeah, yeah, so much.
Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask me before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I'd be totally interested in hearing if there are any other interesting sort of play by forum scenarios which you were in. I'd also be curious about what drew you to the podcast and start and jumping in on the podcasting.
Yeah, that's so I haven't played very many play by post scenarios. I hear about them from friends who do, and one of them was like, "That sounds fun enough. Let's actually play this quantum game."
Okay,
So
yep.
I haven't done many myself. As for what got me into this, I had listened to a couple of episodes that Alex was doing with Kalen, but not very many. And then he had a call to action saying, "I want to keep this going, and partner is leaving. Will someone help?" And I said, "I think I can do that. I like talking to people. I love talking to people. It's one of my favorite pastimes." And that's like half of a podcast, right? I know Spirit Island. I have the knowledge there. I've played 1,000 games. Yeah, I can do that. And reached out to him. We had a chat. We played some games, and we kind of clicked. And well, he he pulled out on me with having a kid.
Kids, as it turns out, take a lot of time.
Yeah, I'm not upset with him at all. I told him to take a break. I want him to have the mental space to be able to do this, and if he ever wants to come chat with us again, like I would love to be able to do that. But kids are a lot.
I remember, I mean, when we had our first kid, I paused all work on game design for like 3 months, and then when we had our second, same for about 6 months. Uh, and then even after that, it would just kind of fluctuate and vary week by week. It's tremendously rewarding, assuming that you want kids. Like the I sometimes talk to folks who are sort of on the fence trying to figure out if they want kids. And I'm like, the good news is if you're on the fence, whichever decision you make is the right one. Because if you decide you want kids, you have bought into it. It's like you've made that like, I am choosing to do a thing. And then that is what will help you in, during the times where it's like, okay, you're staying up late with a sick kid or some other time, which is rough. It's like, all right, this is hard, but I opted into this hardness. It will get easier and it is rewarding and I have chosen this path. Uh, but if you decide you don't want kids, then you would not have opted in, and you shouldn't be doing that because you feel resentful and like don't do it.
Yeah. People who are parents, like, go, you guys. All of you. It's so much effort. I know what I put my parents through. I will just be a spectator seeing other parents and their kids, and I'll be the uncle
Yeah, that's
here and
great.
there.
The I often sometimes I frame it in sort of resource conversion Eurogame terms, where parenting involves you have to invest a huge amount of type one fun up front, which is the sort of like hedonic pleasure, like enjoying going and eating a thing or doing a thing or getting a back rub or like what have you, you know, going out and seeing a show. So you take a lot of you pour in your initial investment of type one fun, which is then like a steady expenditure, but it goes down with time as the kid gets older. Um, but then you start getting payback in both some type one fun because you can get to do fun things with your kids which you couldn't otherwise do, and you get just increasing type two fun, which is the kind of like life satisfaction rewarding feeling. And it just like those dividends just keep getting higher and higher, which is like a really weird economic mathematical way to talk about emotions. But
I like it.
it's sort of a framing where it's like it doesn't. I want to come up with. I want to be able to describe something which doesn't like soft play. Yeah, it takes a whole lot of work, but also it's really worth it because like I got told that a bunch as a kid, but I never got told how it's hard or how it's worth it.
Yeah.
And this I think is a little more specific about that. Like somebody else could probably do better, but it would involve like an essay or poetry or something.
Well, we've
This
already
is a
said
basic
writing's hard.
Eurogaming framing. So yeah,
It's
engine
fun.
building.
You lose out on gaming time now, but think of it, you have a partner in the future to play games with.
It is true. My wife enjoys a few games, mostly positional abstracts, and thankfully Spirit Island, but is often not in the mood for them. My one of my two kids is much more often in the mood for a board game, although they tend to prefer to play with three, so they will often be like, "I want to play a board game, but only if my other sibling wants to play." At which point it's like, oh, well, okay, now we're gating on the one who is less enthusiastic about board games. Well, so it goes. Um,
C'est la
but they
vie.
do want to play some and enjoy some, so it works out.
Cool. Well, is there anything else that we should discuss?
Uh, I think we're good.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for having me on. It has been awesome talking to you.
I've had a blast chatting with you as well, Eric. Thanks for being on the show. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
This concluded our chat. If you enjoyed the episode, follow the podcast and join the Discord to continue the discussion. Bye bye.